And as you can see, my screen is full of faces. We've lined up some of the best out there. Have contact with some new people, so we're going to be doing some introductions. Some of them you may already know. Wayne and Kris have been around for a bit. And then some of them you may have heard of, like Donald, who's here to give us a perspective from a police officer's standpoint. And I'm sure he's got a lot to say. And then Etienne, I'm sorry about your name. You're going to introduce yourself, and I'll get your name correctly. My wife loves your name, so we're going to be able to get that clear. And he reached out to me from Saving Democracy here in Alberta and had some things to say. Get out. Joe Rampart just joined as well. So we're going to have a full panel today. And first, I'm going to ask Wayne and then Donald to go ahead and quickly introduce yourself as we go around this panel.
Hi, my name's Wayne Cunnington from the UK.
I'm Donald Best. I used to be a copper in Toronto a long time ago.
And Kris? Quick intro, Kris, you're muted. Okay, we'll let Kris work that out. And then Saving Democracy, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Etienne, and I'm leading Saving Democracy, whose mission is to strengthen democracy through long-form analysis, debates, and investigative journalism. And I was a former science watchdog and published author in psychology and metascience.
Merci beaucoup. Well, thank you for joining us.
Salut.
Salut. And then Kris, go ahead.
Hey, I'm Kris Erickson. I'm out in British Columbia, and primary work is in human rights advocacy. Done some political work working with Indigenous communities. I'm kind of an independent in the middle guy that can take a look at 30,000 feet and see where we're at.
Thank you for joining us. And Joe, how's your audio today?
Have you got me on this time?
Yes, we can hear you. Fantastic.
There you go. Coming live from Edmonton, Alberta, watching the committee in action. We're listening to the bell ring. What are we hearing that we did or did not hear in January of 2022? I remember those police commission meetings. I do. Do you?
That's wonderful. And yeah, the bell is tolling for Ottawa right now. It's ringing loud. All right, so I'm going to just jump into this. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. We kind of have two topics that I would want to touch on. One will be around police forces and how they're supposed to respond and act, and another one around democracy, sovereignty, and how the government is overstepping, what kind of oversteps, and where do we go from here. I think we have a fantastic panel today for those particular conversation points. And if I could maybe start with Donald, can you give us from a retired Toronto police officer's perspective, is this common to have a split police force and to have these kind of political fighting and infighting going on? Or is this really abnormal and you're kind of surprised to see some of this?
It can be normal, but it's really, really a lot about Chief Slowly. So, we have here, I mean, we see it, we always have, but here I can say we have layers and layers of bureaucracy upon layers and layers of egos. And it has created this organizational chaos. Now, look, I've been on lots of joint forces projects, some really major ones that went all across Canada, all across the world. We had, I worked with the OPP and other municipal police forces, the RCMP. They are a little different. They have a little different temperament. They, now, don't forget, what I'm saying is several decades old. I was the sergeant detective in Toronto, and then I became a private investigator and ran my own agency for 15 years. I've been all around the world doing the same thing, private and public law enforcement. But the RCMP were always told they're Canada's premier police force. And they believe that right in their hearts. And it means that they tend to look down on people, both organizationally and even working with the guys. You notice it. And we call them the horsemen. And because the horseman is above you and always looking down, that's the joke. But that has an operational impact. And usually when a bunch of police officers get together to work at the lower levels, at the street levels, we're all pretty good. It's the same as any job. There are some egos, there are some agendas, but people generally try to work together. Where it really goes off the rails is up the ladder, and this is what we've seen here. Um, where we have the different infighting with the police forces and also within Ottawa itself. And I'll get back to that in a moment. But this whole thing reminds me of during the American War in Vietnam, when Secretary of Defense McNamara sat in Washington deciding which footbridges were going to be bombed in Hanoi. I mean, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work, aside from the whole morality thing there. And there's an analogy to be made here too. So slowly, very, very interesting. If you look in the media articles since he was hired, and going as far back as over 2 years ago, headlines like "Oversight and Temperament Problems at the Ottawa Police Service." That was Ottawa Life, and then you have Police Chief Slowly calls upon Ottawa business to be an important partner in the mayor's breakfast, and that was the Ottawa Business Journal. But when you get into these articles, don't forget you've got a 27-year Toronto police veteran who has been hired to oversee the Ottawa police force because there's something wrong.
Right.
Okay, so you have people who have dedicated their whole life in various, in their whole professional life at various levels in the Ottawa police, who wanted a shot at being chief. They thought they knew the town, and they knew the people, and they resented someone else coming in. Now, a lot of people have tried to make it into a racial thing, and indeed Slowly did himself. I mean, he got in there, and all of a sudden it was all about race, and he made a statement and an opinion piece in the paper that brought race into it, and it was just it really undermined himself. It really did. But it wasn't about race. It was all about you brought someone else in here to
No,
and you didn't choose me. I'm not just talking about Bell. I'm talking about a dozen people on that police force. Even the constables were probably insulted that somebody did this. And then we have an article, which was really something, uh, you know, by the mayor. And he published this one, is it March 8th, 2021. And he talks about we have to support Slowly. And of course, he was one of the, A2 Brute who stabbed him in the back. I think we can say that. And so the reality is Jim Watson and the people who brought in Slowly, um, the whole thing just didn't work. And it didn't work on a number of levels before the convoy even arrived.
correct.
And I think that undermined the whole thing. So that's my whole take on this, and that polluted everything, notwithstanding that, as we've all heard, the declaration of the Emergencies Act was totally unnecessary. Any police officer knows it. I've been, at many riots, and I've been in very large scenarios where we had to do personal protection, the Pope and the President and all the rest of that. And everyone knows that the Emergency Act was totally a political declaration to target political opposition.
Agreed.
That's
Agreed. Yeah, and when you're mentioning that the mayor may have been a Slowly side and stuff, do you think that's why the police board went and replaced the chief without even consulting and giving a heads up to the mayor, and single sourcing it as well, not even looking at other candidates?
You never know, but I think that in part their decision was because it didn't work having an external chief. Now, I haven't heard. Do we know who's going to be chief or declared chief at the, next time? Have we heard about that? I don't
No,
think we have we?
some rumors that is coming soon. It might come after the election, which is today. The municipal elections
Yeah,
today.
I would be very surprised if they went with an outsider again. But who knows?
Yeah, and building on that, Joe. So as Donald laid out, there was clearly some dysfunction going on, and he can see it from being someone from the inside. How about from the outside, as a reporter watching the whole events? Could you see the dysfunction happening real time as well during the protests? And if so, how do you think that actually impacted the ability to negotiate and use the PLT teams or PLU teams effectively?
A total speed bump on the road. This was evident in the early city council meetings of early February and the police commission meetings as well. You could see the utter contempt that Slowly was receiving from Ferguson as well as Bell. Bell sits there today with that stoic look on his face, but believe you me, he telegraphed a lot of emotions during the police commission meetings of the week of February 7th. So what I see is exactly as Don has laid out so articulately, that the whole scenario in Ottawa was an internal divide. You can certainly see that there's this side, that side, as well as the political spectrum. It's a roadblock, a speed bump, and this is a big issue that they're trying to overcome. It's a continuation of ping pong with a grenade. Who's going to get stuck with the hot potato today?
Absolutely. And we've heard a lot of talk, Donald and Joe, about a new central command or possibly a command OPP level or higher that would take over when city police forces fail. We've heard conversation around a triggering event, or something should be in place in order to trigger the taking over if the police force is not capable anymore. And we've also heard one through not so much testimony, but through the question asking, implying that this particular event would have qualified for the particular trigger that they're talking about. All of that scares me, because I don't think this event should have triggered anything, let alone a new command to take over the local police force, even if they are dysfunctional. I'm going to go to Etienne. Hope I got that correct, or at least close enough. You're a watchdog around oversight, federalism, making sure that the government is sticking to the rules. And clearly, something like a new central command and the response with the Emergencies Act would be two wonderful examples of where the government is overreached or is planning to or talking about overreaching. What would be your position on a new central command that could override localities, police forces? And where do you think they're going with this? And how does that make you feel when democracy is one of the biggest passions that you have?
Right. No, I'm definitely against it, and we need to go the other way in terms of passing new legislation to add new safeguards, new democratic safeguards. I sometimes call it bulletproofing democracy, though some people don't like the word bullet. And then you could even go further and try to make it anti-fragile. So this is, from Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile. It would be a system that when our democratic system gets threatened, it actually automatically becomes stronger. And those are, sound like pie in the sky ideas, but we need to really brainstorm because, this has been going on for way too long. And so many people, there's probably thousands and thousands of different groups who tried, legal routes, tried suing the governments at the different levels, municipal, provincial, federal, and, all these lawyers and all these groups, independent journalists, right? But how much progress, have we really made, right? And again, it's the direction of where it's going. And I actually, maybe later on, I'm working on this chart to actually lay out the authoritarian developments in each of our 6 basic fundamental freedoms. And in each of the 6 categories, there are very serious developments that are threatening those fundamental freedoms. And it's the direction. It's like the rate of change. It's the derivative of like, where are our freedoms going, and how can we stop this erosion? And again, how can we bulletproof it? And my background in social psychology biases me towards trying to engage a grassroots movement, right? And so we had the Freedom Convoy, which awoke a lot of people, but I still argue that there's a lot more that we can do to coordinate these grassroots movements to make concrete progress, not just, okay, let's meet in the park once a week and then have some speeches and then we go back home and we just watch our democracy slip away, right? So that would be my 2 cents for that.
And Kris, I'm going to come to you next. So one question we had on Friday was sovereignty for First Nations and protesting for First Nations. If there was a new central command, and that would obviously have to apply coast to coast and on all territory and all sovereign land, what do you think the communities, First Nation, would do if there was a central command that said, hey, you have a protest here, protest ABC. We're not happy with it, and we're not happy with your response to it. We're going to come over and take over now. We're just giving you a courtesy notice, and we're going to go do this. How do you think the response would be? I can imagine it wouldn't be a red carpet rolled out to let them come in. I would imagine that there would be a new fight, a new battle on their hands.
Yeah, and that's the key with that as well. Like, we have over 650 First Nations in this country, and each their own specific issues. And what we see with Indigenous communities is, well, they may not all align on everything. If one of them is under attack, or a few of them are under, attack in their mind, they come together very quickly. And so the potential for escalation in that situation, for to have a governing body like that come in and just take control, I think would have the potential to create more hostility. I mean, a lot of the times it comes down to, like even what we're seeing here, you get dialogue going, and that seems to be a problem for some of the people that are in the room. And with these situations, as they continue to escalate, if we get to the point where, again, it's different. In BC, you have different sovereignty rights, but in Alberta, you have, if there's, let's just say, natural resources and other things, if there's protests in that regard, you're also going to be pinning First Nation against First Nation, or Indigenous community, Native communities, however you want to describe. But the dynamics there are so complicated that having a robust response, you saw what happened with Oka years ago. Like, you don't want, and that was over building a golf course on an ancestral burial ground. And so the potential for things to escalate, having a brute force approach, because I don't like the centralized, right? I still think I'm a firm believer those on the ground, whether it's tribal police, local police, municipal, provincial, whatever, wherever you can get dialogue where there's relationships already built. Oftentimes when people come in from outside, there is no previous relationships built, so there's not much opportunity to build dialogue quickly and de-escalate. So I think there's a lot more problems that come out of centralized authority in that situation. I just don't trust that there would be enough empathy and compassion at the table to try and get sides to a conclusion. And that's just based off of, to invoke the Emergencies Act while you're in dialogue. As somebody who's been in very high stressed positions before, where dialogue is the only thing keeping it going, if that was really the only thing that mattered to me when I came into a situation, is where's dialogue at? How do we get dialogue going? How do we understand? Let's get the right people in the room, kick the egos and the agendas out, and let's just see how we can find a resolution to this that everybody can live with. And when you bring the boot in, it's just, there's no time for talk. We saw that, right?
Yeah.
Horses come out, and you can't even get IDs off of some of the police officers who were there. So it's very tenuous. I would be totally opposed to it, and I believe First Nations would be as well. That's just my opinion. I'm not speaking on their behalf, that's for sure.
Yeah, I was shocked at the actions we took, had the police horses in there, the different methods we used to push people back. And Donald, this was against protesters and peaceful protesters. What would it look like if they went to Toronto police and said, hey, you guys are not doing a good enough job. We're going to now take over from Central Command, and we're moving in some new police. Would the Toronto police welcome that? Or do you think there would be even some resistance on the ground with that?
There's always resistance. I've been there. When the Pope came, John Paul II came, everybody worked pretty well together, but it was this constant battle between the RCMP, the OPP, and Toronto, because it was our turf. And in the end, the guys at the street worked well together, but it's always a constant battle. the danger, the great danger of centralized command is that it totally undermines local and even individual authority of a police officer. Now this is one of the cases we have going right now in Ottawa. Detective Helen Gruce used her autonomy as an investigator to investigate whether there was a potential connection between a cluster of sudden 9 infant deaths and whether the mother was vaccinated, were they breastfeeding, whatever. And for that, she's up on charges. Why? Well, we can't have that, can we? That's exactly why they did that. So the reason we have individual police forces, and it's a constant battle in Ontario, and it's going on with the RCMP in Alberta right now. Alberta wants its own provincial police force back, and so they should, because there's no way that that somebody in Ottawa should be directing as what goes on in an alley in Red Deer, Alberta. And this is what you get with central control. You also get abuse. I mean, look what we saw with central control of the banks during the Emergencies Act. Unbelievable that the government and the police ordered banks to seize Canadian assets with no judge's order, no due process,
No
totally
appeal.
against the rule of law, no appeal, nothing. We've seen what they will do with central power when they get a hold of it. So when we have, and what's the trigger? A bunch of bouncy castles? I'm serious. We heard throughout the entire intelligence briefings here that it could have been, would have been, might have been, should have been. We were fearful that, but in the end, we saw nothing. And indeed, the intelligence reports, both CSIS and also especially the OPP intelligence, said that there's no danger here. It's unprecedented. We have a bunch of middle-class Canadians who are coming to deliver a political message to Ottawa. Nothing wrong with that.
No.
And we don't foresee great dangers other than the normal of the number of people, which is fine. We're prepared to deal with that, or we should be. But the political agenda came down on top of that. Prime Minister refused to meet with them, name them, called them names, said they were dangerous, said they were all sorts of things. And at the same time, having met with Black Lives Matter. Don't forget, Chief Slowly and the Prime Minister of Canada knelt with Black Lives Matter protesters in Ottawa, contrary to the law at the time that was imposed over the COVID mandates and the number of people that could get together and everything like that. They broke the law. They destroyed the rule of law. So once again, we have totally arbitrary enforcement of the law based on, hey, the Prime Minister doesn't like this group of people. Now, you put a centralized police control on that, with the Prime Minister or a friend of his pulling the strings, and, well, we don't want our country going there, do we? So absolutely no to centralized police control. This is has been a battle all throughout history. Oligarchs and tyrants want centralized use of force, and that's what it is. So no, it's dangerous. That's
I
my
agree
vote.
completely. I agree completely. And Etienne, here in Alberta, we're pushing for the Alberta Police Force. And I think what we've learned here, this is a fantastic example or a template of why we should have an Alberta Police Force. Exactly what Donna was saying, having the banks all cooperating with the federal government. And for example, Etienne, we had Tamara Lynch picked up by the RCMP here in Alberta and then dragged across country on a Canadian-wide warrant. That should never have happened. That should have been an extradition type of process with our courts here. It should have been our police cooperating with federal police. It shouldn't have been a federal police force that just came and took her. So for those reasons and many more, I am definitely for APP, the Alberta Police, Provincial Police. Where you stand, and how does that fit within the push for democracy and sovereignty that you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would support that as well. I guess I just have some skepticism with some of these pronouncements that just seem just a bit too good to be true, and I don't think we don't need to go that far back with even Jason Kenney. At first, when they were first start talking about the COVID vaccine mandates, of course he came out and said, no, 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 we would never consider that. And then 3 months later, well, we might need to consider that. And then 3 months later, we are going with that, right? And so with Daniel Smith, there's just a lot of question marks and a lot of I would say even already a lot of issues. So for example, her choosing the same cabinet and then adding, instead of firing Hinshaw, and again, we need individual accountability, right? And this is really important, whether it's an individual police officer. So for example, during the Freedom Convoy, not to digress, but all of a sudden the bylaw officers, and I was an Ottawa resident for 2 years while the Freedom Convoy was going on. And I know that Ottawa bylaw and Ottawa police are very good at their job. So why did magically they were told, don't go in the red zone because it's so dangerous? But no, it's your responsibility to do your job, right? And so to go back to Alberta, it would be Daniel Smith's job to say, well, let's hold Hinshaw accountable. Let's not just add some new management, right? Because what she did, from my understanding, is serious medical ethics violation with bringing in COVID mandates, vaccine mandates, right? So how come she's just pushing that under the rug, making these grand pronouncements that sound too good to be true? So I definitely applaud these developments, but I'm also skeptical, even though I don't want to be. I want some good news, right? But the job of an intellectual, the job of a careful thinker, is to be skeptical and look at, are all the facts lining up here? What are some problems with Daniel Smith? What are some problems with the Alberta Independence Party, which is similar? Like on the surface, that sounds great. But you dig a bit deeper and you're like, well, what about Saskatchewans? I mean, like Saskatchewans and Albertans are kind of brothers, right? Mm-hmm. So, maybe there are problems there. Maybe there's possibility that they want people to just go back again, sit back on their couch and say, okay, well, we've got Daniel Smith, we've got the Alberta Independence Party. We can just sit back and go back to our lives and be, keyboard activists. And so I applaud the news, but at the same time, I'm skeptical. And again, I think we need to get down to more concrete actions and grassroots movements to awaken the people. Because again, if the majority of people still believe in the narrative that the coronavirus is this dangerous virus for everyone and that the COVID vaccine is safe and effective, then I don't think we'll make much progress, right? Because if those things are true, which I believe they're not, but if you truly believe the coronavirus is dangerous to everyone and the COVID vaccine is safe and effective, then it does potentially make sense to start saying, well, we should have quarantine camps and we should, block and discriminate against unvaccinated people, right? But if those things are not true, well, then you have serious medical ethics violations, and these people should be investigated. And I still believe in due process. I mean, even the prime minister, I would still give him due process and presumed innocence, right? But we need to get down to the facts and hold individual people accountable, rather than just saying, well, I was following orders from higher up and I'm not sure, where this is coming from. No, you're in power. You are accountable. So that would be my comment on that.
Sounds like you would support independent oversight for sure.
Yes.
Wayne, you live in the original Central Command, the UK. So at one point, the sun never sets on the UK. But over the years with Queen Elizabeth II, less and less, they were creating more sovereignty. They were not so much allowing countries to leave, but there's more of a release of the Central Command over the last, say, like 40 years or so, and a renewed call for a lot of that now that the Queen has passed and we're on to a king. is the release of the control over Commonwealth. Is this why we're getting a power vacuum that's coming in behind, and we're now getting another global or UN or another type of organization filling in the gap behind the Commonwealth as the Queen was releasing power? Did we have a new type of power come in and try and take up the void? Because we're seeing a lot of globalization and centralization on many different fronts, not just policing. And I'm wondering, is that because there was a power vacuum left behind? Or is this just the way some people think? Everybody needs to be under control and we're not strong enough to push for independence and true sovereignty?
Yeah, 2 points. I'm going to touch on Etienne's comments in a minute, because there was another important inquiry going on today over vaccine safety. It was coming off the back of last Thursday's, which was a vaccine injury inquiry. That was a very good debate. That was kind of, I was listening into that while I was listening into this today, and it was just very, very interesting. The comments made by some of the politicians were very pro-vaccine, very, very much that they are safe and effective. There's no evidence that they aren't, which is totally false, because all the evidence is out there. Our own MPs actually stated this fact in the chambers, that there were numerous statements made recently, even the one in European Parliament by the MEP Rob Roos, about that they never even tested the safety and effectiveness of the vaccines before they put them on the market. So all this is out there, but of course they don't want to acknowledge it, and they won't acknowledge it because that's too damaging. But Christopher Chope, who's the guy who actually brought the inquiry to start, brilliantly reminded everybody that there's so much happening, there's so many increased deaths, there's so many people wanting help. And it's a good point, because it's fighting back against their narrative. Touching on what you were saying about the royal family, the Queen held the country in such a way for many years that she stopped the globalists actually introducing more things, because King Charles, I'll say, I don't think he's actually earned the title because of what his policies he actually wants to bring in. He's very much for the green agenda, which you're probably aware of. He's been part of the Terra Carta, which is a green-loving ideal that they want plants and the earth to be reigning supreme. So that means the people who live on it don't come anywhere near. So we must protect the earth. We must reduce the population, which is pretty much what the World Economic Forum has been channeling for so long. So the danger is, with him now sitting in the hot seat, how fast will he then push these things forward? There are a number of countries talking about the Commonwealth, and actually should they now leave it, because things are changing too dramatically. What was once a lovely sort of a romanticized ideal of having the royal family as part of your country is now sadly changing. So many connections were lost during her reign, like 70 odd years reign. There's been a lot of respect, a lot of thought given to people, and people respected that. But with now her gone, that connection's lost, and so they are, I don't know if they're actually going off the royal family, because some people will love it forever. Everybody's thoughts are differently on it. My thoughts changed very many years ago with the death of Princess Diana and numerous connections to that. And the family has gone through a lot of battles with Prince Andrew and his connections with the Epstein family. So they are a family in trouble.
Yeah. And rightfully so. And by the way, Epstein didn't kill himself. Yeah. That didn't happen. Kris, look, Wayne is outlined how we used to be, governed by the Queen, and we used to be that kind of monarchy country. But we've now, stepped back from that, and we should be a representative country where we have representation and we have opposition. I've noticed that the Conservative Party is not a standing party in these inquiries, but they did apply for it. They did look to become a standing party, but they are not there. Did you look into maybe why that is, and why aren't we hearing from the official opposition as to where they at least show us what kind of opposition that they was trying to have? Because I didn't see much at all. So what's your take on why the Conservative Party of Canada applied for standing and didn't end up receiving it? Do you have any take on that?
Well, I think it was the basis of the application denial was to keep it from being a partisan hearing. I went through the document and their application in regards to reputation. They want to submit evidentiary documents, and I kind of agree with keeping them out. There are two committees, one in the Senate and I believe another parliamentary committee that'll be looking at it. My concern is with the exclusion. That will the evidence that's taken place, like will the hearings and all the things that go on in the Senate and other parliamentary committees, will that be considered by will it be submitted before the final document comes out to the public with regards to it, or are they completely separate? There was an example from a previous hearing where there was a precedent set where we were not going to allow the opposition to testify. My understanding when I read it, and I have to go back over it just to be clear, it seems to me like if something comes up in the hearing, whereas the Conservative Party reputation, they can apply for some kind of a standing again, but I still don't think that that's going to happen. And to be honest with you, I don't think I'd want them in there. I'd much rather see them stand up in the House of Commons. I'd much rather see them hold, daily briefings and other things where they can comment on. But even then, the appropriateness of as the hearing is going on is another thing is questioned, because they're not necessarily being attacked. From what I've seen so far, it's all been on the ground. There's really been no relevance to the CPC. So I wouldn't necessarily want to see that, in my opinion. But you could also argue that Jagmeet Singh should be somebody who should be called. I don't believe he is, as far as what evidence was given to you to justify the party voting all in favor of the deployment. But I still think that keeping it out, it's already a circus. For the guy who likes to eat popcorn when I watch this kind of stuff, would enjoy seeing the CPC in there, but I think it could tend to serve more harm than good as far as what's in the public's interest, as far as what is appropriate and what is not. But again, it's still, they applied for it, and it's sad to see. But in the end, I agree with the decision to keep them out. I just think it's better for the process. Don't allow any more tainting to happen, and just if they want to do things on the outside, I would encourage them to comment on things, but I think that you could also argue it would be better once have them comment and do a full overview of the results of the hearing, and as opposed to stoking flames during it. But there's always that one that I'd love to see them out there swinging. It'd be nice, because there's a lot of undue behavior going on. That's for sure.
So there's definitely another House committee or an investigation, right? I don't know any details about that. That one doesn't seem to be very public. I don't think that one's being streamed. I don't think we're going to get this kind of access to it like we're doing with this inquiry. And Joe, when we're talking about accountability and transparency with the government, do you really have confidence that this particular House will do a good investigation with the 44th Parliament and the cabinet from Trudeau? Is there any chance that we're going to get a valid investigation, or are we really going to have to wait till the 45th Parliament to get some real teeth into an investigation in the House?
I really think it depends on the ability of the presiding judge of the committee to articulately either cover the facts, obfuscate the facts, or clarify the facts. A lot of it's going to come down to his report. A quick comment on the lack of Conservative representation at this point in the committee. Well, you pointed it out clearly. You didn't see any opposition to any of this from Aaron O'Toole or any one of his other bang of fools. So what we're basically dealing with here is a continuation of the usual Canadian process of let's take a cup of tea and talk it through until we're ad nauseum blue in the face. The bigger concern that I have is the development that will occur on November 17th when the new city police chief of Ottawa takes the helm. And if people are not familiar with Eric Stubbs and his adventures at E Division in British Columbia, with his oversight of the militarized response to the Wet'suwet'en protests, that also included his endorsement of what's known as lethal oversight, we need to be very cautious of this new chief of police. I don't think that this is the kind of fella that's going to sit back and take too much internal division. He seems to be a little bit more of the rougher kind. And don't forget that it was well reported by reporters on the ground in British Columbia that officers under his command took direction from the Coastal Gas Pipe employees as to how to operate. So this is really concerning for me as we develop. So we'll keep our eyes open on it, but great comments. Thank you.
Yeah, and Donald, there we go. So we have a little bit more information. So it sounds like an external police chief coming in on the 17th, and he's got really heavy boots on this guy. What's your take on that? It sounds like maybe we're not going to get another chief who knows the city and knows the people well. We're going to get somebody from the outside who's more willing to rough it up. At least his history has shown that. What do you think about that?
Well, you can look at it a couple of different ways. First of all, yes, maybe a rough guy is what's needed now, because it seems that we've had no real leadership. And leadership is not being rough, but sometimes it is. So, okay, maybe. But at the same time, I still think he's going to be facing the same problems that Slowly had, which is he's an outsider. And that means an awful lot. On the other hand, there's been so much acknowledgement of the chaos now that even the guys on the street might say, okay, give the guy a chance. I don't know. But it's amazing how much someone can go into a position and be undermined, not only by their peers at the senior level, but by the people on the street and the citizens. All I can say is we'll see. I don't like the fact that we have someone with a national police force roots, once again, looking after Ottawa. Yes, it's our capital city, but what it means is it's going to be, if anything, more politicized. Now, we saw that with the current commissioner of the RCMP, who in the middle of the SCN Lavigne investigations gave the prime minister a big hug and a kiss. Okay. I mean, that just illustrates everything. And then this latest revelation that in the inquiry to the mass murder down east, that the RCMP commissioner tried to interfere in a homicide investigation for political purposes. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I've heard the call, seen the transcript, read all about it. Yep, that's what she did. She shouldn't even be. She shouldn't be wearing the uniform right now. She should have resigned if she had any honor. She has thoroughly politicized the police in favor, our national police, in favor of the sitting Liberal government. Never before have we seen this to such an extent, and openly talked about, and no one cares, and they do nothing about it. So I hope, and I fear rather, that now that we have an RCMP as chief of the Ottawa Police Force, I fear that will lead to more external control of policing and an undermining of local, individual, and police force, police organization autonomy.
Yep. I agree with you 100%. That seems like why they're bringing this one in, is to usher in that new central command with the consent of the OPS. That's what it looks like to me too. Do you think other police forces like Vancouver or Montreal, what do you think they're going to say when this conversation continues? Especially Montreal.
Okay, they're going to say no. They really are. There's going to be a lot of pushback. I think that this, they might talk about a central plan for Ottawa if something big happens, and they'll try and impose that. But by gosh, I'm chief in Kitchener, Ontario, and I'm not going to send my people unless I want to. And that's the way it goes. So there's a lot of pushback there. Don't forget the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. It's a major organization in Canada, of course, but within that organization, they have the major cities organization. So if you're chief of police of a major city, you get to be part of that. And a lot of what goes on is made at that table. A lot of federal policy and response across Canada is made at that table. And I know those people, at least I know the type of people they are. And this is my town. Ottawa is not going to direct me and give me
No
orders.
kidding. And
Yep.
and Etienne, so we were hearing from Chief Superintendent Purdy about if they were to do the central command, it would require participation from everyone. And now we know what that means. They would want 100% participation. I can't imagine Edmonton and Calgary being one of the first to jump on board with anything like this. So what do you think might be a response from those two police forces around the idea of voluntarily mandatory being part of a central command? I can't imagine that they would be buying in anytime soon. And what would you think it would take to force them onto it? Because that would be the only way to get all police forces on it.
Yeah, I mean that's really unclear. I think they would have to use some kind of coercion. But again, how can we get more accountability when things like what Donald just mentioned is even like the RCMP commissioner not acting ethically. Of course, we all know that Trudeau has how many ethics violations. And I saw that in my science watchdog work as well. I mean, I submitted ethics complaints violation against all Canadian funding agencies, right? So there's 3 funding agencies that give money to researchers to do research, whether it's medical research, physics, and they're not even abiding by like basic ethical codes of conduct of like sharing data. So science, you don't believe a scientific paper because it's published. You believe it because you can check the details yourself. And that involves what's now called open data. And there's all kinds of technology to make sure that you're sharing data and de-identifying data so that you're respecting confidentiality rules. And so I submit these ethics complaints, and they just basically write back 6 months later saying that your evidence is insufficient. And it's like, okay, now I need to file an appeal, right? I need to file an ethics complaint against the ethics commissioner, right? And it's just like, it seems like, again, how can the things be this bad, and how could it have accelerated this quickly where even ethics commissioners are acting unethically, right? And this is, again, where we need to get a lot more creative and a lot more aggressive. I mean, in terms of offense, right? So I really think offense is the best defense, and there's just too much defense. People are on the defense. They're like, oh no, we have these COVID measures. Now we're in defense mode, and now we have this new problem, and now we have the mandatory masking and the lockdowns, and then the COVID mandates, right? And so I think we need to actually have more offense, right? To be in a better position instead of just retroactively catching up, because they whoever they is seem to be several steps ahead of us, kind of like a chess game, right? And they have a lot of resources, they have a lot of people working, and so I think we need to adopt a more offensive strategy. I'm not talking about armed resistance. I'm talking about like actual offensive, like mobilization of lawyer groups and human rights lawyers and independent journalists, and just keep plowing down of like, okay, ethics complaint and then an appeal, police. Donald could speak about that. Like, so even with the COVID vaccine injuries, I had started a letter signed by independent scientists to look into, this was last year when there was a series of young deaths among young, healthy people following COVID vaccination. It was covered by Randy Hillier. And then I asked the people, well, like we could submit this to the to try to submit this to as many local police headquarters as possible. And if they don't investigate, if they don't start an investigation, then we can file a complaint, right? Because under the Police Services Act, and I'd like to hear Donald's comment on this, like there's supposed to be safeguards in terms of, well, we have all this evidence, credible evidence. I'm not talking about just like a Yahoo showing up with, diagrams and scribbled notes, right? This is very well tabulated, collected, curated evidence of harms following COVID vaccination, and the police doesn't seem interested in investigating, right? So how could we then go to the appeals process to say, well, they did not investigate when it was justified?
Yeah, centralizing
if I can speak to that, because you touched a nerve with me there. And this is, you mentioned, we should get lawyers to go and everything. Oh, really? We should get journalists? The journalists who are paid by the Liberal government to go and investigate this? We have a police officer in Ottawa right now, a very competent, diligent detective who has investigated homicides, whose job is to investigate deaths of infants. And that detective, she tried to see if there was a link, a potential link, and they shut her down, and they're threatening to ruin her whole life and stop her job and everything. And lawyers, every province, every lawyer organization, lawyers unions, in every province, it's all arranged so that if there's a complaint and there's an investigation that needs to be done, even a very serious complaint about a lawyer, it's investigated by the same people they went to school with, the same people they work with, the same people they go to synagogue or church with or mass with, and the same people they party with, the same people they work with every day. That's who investigates the lawyers. We need, for instance, right there, we need an independent agency like we have with the police. I know it's not the perfect solution, but at least when the police use it, cause serious injuries or death, or they're involved in it, at least there's an external body to investigate them. We don't have that for journalists. We don't have it for lawyers and everything. So pardon me for not having any faith at all in relying on the system. I'm not saying we shouldn't, Etienne. We should. We have to use their system. If the rules say that they must, answer a complaint, and they don't, then yes, we have to complain. If we complain to them about a homicide and they don't answer us, well, then we have to complain, and we have to do that. But I'm sorry, I lost faith in the mechanisms of our government and our justice system and our police that are supposed to have oversight. I lost faith in them a long time ago. It took a long time. I even went to prison, and my faith in the system wasn't shaken. But it was the COVID, the lockdowns, the mandates, and the judges and the political parties, the uni party that just went along with it. Big money involved.
Right.
I've lost my faith in the system. I'm not calling for violence. I absolutely.
Well, that's
not.
what I say. What are the other alternatives then, right? So, and I should clarify. I mean, like independent lawyers, independent journalists,
watchdogs,
and this is why at Saving Democracy we actually are like super transparent about our conflict of interest and our financial independence, because that's a big problem. You need to be financially independent of the people you're criticizing. And as you're saying, most lawyers are still kind of part of establishment, and most of these mechanisms are still too closely tied to the establishment, to the elite class, the laptop class. But what are the alternatives, right? Like if and as I guess mentioned, like it does seem like most of these efforts and like thousands and thousands of groups and independent groups and lawyers and legal cases and ethics complaints, right? I mean, what are the alternatives? What are the other nonviolent alternatives?
Well, Kris, I'm going to turn to Kris on this one because I think he may have some insight on what some of the problem is. You've spent a lot of time working with parties, helping people get elected, working on campaigns and stuff like that. And here we are. We're all asking for some sort of independent oversight and transparency because we all know inherently we need a referee at a hockey game to make the game fair and enjoyable. This is kind of the same thing. But what we're truly asking is we're asking for parties which themselves don't have a transparent process in place on how they do their business. But we're asking the party to, hey, why don't you champion in some more oversight and transparency into the government, but you can keep your secrets to yourself too. Like, how are we asking a group or even demanding of a group to bring in oversight when the group itself has things like a party whip and party platform and party conversations behind closed doors? They themselves are not even open and transparent. So are we asking, the wolves to help us with the hen house here? Is it a little silly of us to even consider that that's an option, or are we closer to what Donald and Etienne said? We kind of need some independent um, offense here, a little bit stronger offense, and maybe not be so much defense. And just to quickly, before I go to you there, Kris, Etienne, I think the answer is Danielle Smith following through with what she says, and we could be a template for the country. And Saskatchewan would follow quickly if we did do that. That might be a path forward. But I'm still not 100% confident because we're dealing with a conservative party, which then themselves don't have transparency as well. So back to
Right.
Kris, we're asking these parties who lead us, hey, we need more insight, but they themselves don't subscribe to that philosophy unless they're talking about the other guys. So how do we deal with these foxes in the henhouse?
Well, I think it's almost twofold because I think there's a level of comfort that they have settled into with the establishment parties, and I think that there's such a level of disconnect and a willingness for a lot of party loyalists to allow their whoever, like, I'll use Poilievre as an example, but it is a repetitive machine. They say whatever they have to before they get elected, and then silence comes. And I think that this time around, I think it's a little bit different because of where we're at as a country. But as far as getting them to change, I don't even know if I was, I would recommend to Poilievre to fire all of his advisors. If you really are in a situation where, define what freedom means. And when you get to the point where you can't even get, doesn't matter who's in power. When Harper was in power, it's the same game. There are certain things you don't talk about that the establishment benefits from both sides. And so it's this. I can remember even just being in rooms with, you not the proverbial down in a basement drinking out of $100 whiskey bottle, but similar, where you're hearing the discussions. And what's always missing in these discussions is the impact of the decisions on the people on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're at a situation where you can't even get the opposition to acknowledge that wrongdoing has happened. Danielle Smith started that conversation, but a lot of times it looks to me like, okay, well then the media comes and attacks and they get all the bots online that are doing their thing. It doesn't lead to I hate using the term safe space, but we don't have any proper safe place for civil discourse to occur where the actual concerns, the actual evidence can be viewed without that contextual shift. They take everything that we say out of context and just run with that narrative. And so I think the opposition and parties have forgotten what their job is, in my opinion. I think that there's too much consideration for those chess moves in relation to how it looks politically, as opposed to what's in the best interest of the of the country, and what the citizens of this country, regardless of political background, need from their opposition. And so when we have constitutional violations like this, and you don't have, my opinion, constitutional violations, and you don't have a local opposition, it shows how easily what a uniparty can look like as far as watching the citizenry get run over, and the lack of redress that we've had, having to wait 2 years or whatever, a year and a half just to even get into a court setting, and then you have things thrown out and dismissed. Independent thinking and independent critical thinking, I don't care what it is, we need independence, we need PPC, we need people in the House of Commons and people who are not scared of, the narrative. To me, it makes no sense. So like, okay, well, Poilievre and our opposition won't say anything because the media will eat them alive. Well, we see what Kerry Lake does. We see other examples of how you don't play their game. You act like an adult, and that's what I think Canadians are missing right now is we don't seem to have adults. I can't watch Question Period anymore. To think of that's our representation, it makes no sense to me. It's a giant waste of time. They're all playing these games. Let's try to get a hashtag trending and just the same loop. And it was no different. O'Toole was the same, right? It's they just changed the face, but there's never any follow through. And then you have the loyalists, doesn't matter what party, the loyalists protect their leader. Even when they're not holding up, they won't answer questions, they won't follow through on what they're saying. And I've got to be careful because I do want to give Polyev a bit of time. I do give him a hard time online a little bit, but I still don't have any. If he was going to stand up and say I've got a spine and I'm gonna stand up for Canadians' rights and acknowledge wrongdoings, I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's all just play the game, run the scenario, and in the end, Trudeau could end up with a minority. The Conservatives could end up with a minority.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I hope not. I'm just going to let everybody know it's going to be back any moment now, and I'm going to ask Joe for closing comments here. Joe, is there room for independent MPs within a party? Do you think a party could be mature enough to grow up and say, "Hey, look, we can have debate within the party, and we can promote independent MPs"? Nobody's talking about it, but is there room for that? And do you think that could actually maybe help parties be internally less traditional and less controlling and more open? What do you think, Joe? We may have lost you, Joe. I can throw that over to Etienne if you want to take that one. Oh, we got the commission back. Sorry, I got the audio. So thank you everybody for your this video will be posted shortly, probably tonight. And if you would like to come back, I would like to welcome all of you back. And Etienne, I would like to do an episode just with you about Alberta democracy and your
Sounds
efforts.
good.
So if
Thanks
we
for
can
having
arrange
me.
that'd be great.
Thanks for
Donald,
having me.
thank you so much for being here. You've been working hard to get better the last week or so. You sound great. You look great. And I'm glad you're back on your feet. And Joe, if you can hear me, it was wonderful having you back. And Kris, looking forward to catching up again. And let's keep working on getting the message out in Alberta, BC, and across Canada. And Wayne, once again, my friend, thank you for being such a trooper, giving us an international perspective on Canada and sharing your unique perspective, especially when it comes to vaccine injury. I did the video with Wayne. It's a 2.5 hour long video about his story and what he's working on. So you can find that on my YouTube channel. And go ahead and give us a like, and let's get that message out to the rest of Canada. So once again, thank you all very much for taking up your lunch break with me and sharing this information with us. And I look forward to a lot more of these as we go through this inquiry and we hear from more witnesses, especially the federal government. I think we're going to see a lot more problems with this command structure and this new idea of a central command structure. I'm very worried that that's where we're headed. Donald, I'm going to give you the last word because we still have some more time here. So if you want to go ahead and give us what we should be looking forward to and looking for in the testimony this week from the police.
Well, we're going to hear more chaos is what we're going to hear. We're going to hear about more organizational chaos. We're going to hear about the clash of egos. They won't phrase it that way. But I think that the important thing that the police are giving us and have given us is they were quite happy to do their jobs without the Emergency Act. They never asked for it. They didn't need it. And that's what this inquiry is all about.
Yeah, and I think we've answered that question already. OPP, OPS, basically each group that's come up now did say that the plan that they used before the EA was put into effect is the plan that they ended up using anyways. And I hope that the CCF is successful at getting Doug Ford to enter this inquiry as well, because hearing why the province didn't use the existing Emergency Act and the tools available in that to deal with the situation, I think is paramount to this entire question on whether or not the Emergency Act was required. I'm still pretty confident that we're getting some of the good answers, and he's still not there yet. So, Etienne, if you wanted to go ahead and try and get the last word in, and let everybody know how they can reach out to you and maybe help get some more information and help your program, go ahead.
Sure. So Saving Democracy, again, our goal is to strengthen democracy through long-form analysis. The truth is in the details. And in this case, you got to dive deeply into each issue, but then you also need breadth. And we also want to organize more debates, civilized debates with actual left-leaning establishment people. So I still have some friends from grad school. I lost most of them, but I still have some friends, and it's hard to find people to defend the government's actions. But again, that's how you get to the bottom of the truth, is having vigorous debates. So the website is savingdemocracy.ca. We have live stream Tuesday, Thursday mornings, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks again for having me.
Hey, my pleasure. And it looks like they've now cut the feed for a bit. So maybe they're running into some more database issues or some other issue. So we actually can keep going, seeing how you're all still here. I'd be happy to keep going. Let's go to Kris. Kris, I'm going to put you on the spot because this is a last minute question. But how have you been finding the inquiry so far? Are you optimistic, pessimistic, or still reserving your judgment?
I'm doing my best to reserve my judgment. It seems to me that it is designed most likely to lead to a recommendation that lays out it was nothing but chaos, so we need that centralized power. For someone who's just a big fan, I view it more so as let's just get the historical accounts on record. It's a matter of just going through the process. I don't think, without Lucky having resigned, like no one resigns with this government. Singh came out yesterday and said that he's likely to continue supporting the government regardless of the outcome. It doesn't give me a lot of hope, although I'm happy. It's because of the system they have in place that you have people that are coming out that are not willing to just jump under the bus. So they're going to come out, they're going to speak the truth. So it gives us a little bit more of an accurate account of what was actually going on behind the scenes. And I think that's important for people to see, but I've seen nothing so far that would indicate, it's over, in my opinion, unless there's a bombshell, towards the end where all of a sudden these violent acts that none of us saw, all of a sudden, something's introduced that really changes the narrative. I think it's the grossest abuse of power our country's ever seen. One of, if not the grossest.
Yeah, this and the World War II Japanese tragedy that we did there, where we rounded up a race just because of a war that they had nothing to do with. We've done some things in Canada we're not proud of. But here we are looking at the inquiry, and I think this might be a nice pivot in Canada of what we're going to expect going forward when it comes to transparency. I'd like to see a lot more streams like this for basically everything. I would like no more closed doors in government. That would be wonderful. I agree with you. What I don't know is staggering. By the way, I love having to say the names like that. I think the answer is definitely to educate the regular people. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here with this platform. This is why we're all getting together, using our time. None of us are on the CBC dole or the government dole when it comes to independent reporting. In fact, Bill C-11 is kind of targeted towards all of us, the independent reporters. So that will be another conversation we have shortly, because they want full control over information. And I can absolutely imagine that videos like this and platforms like this is exactly what they don't want, because this is what we're doing. We're sharing real people, real information. There's no central command here, and we're not vetting anybody. Every one of my guests will tell you I basically asked them if they'll be here, and that was the extent of preparing and making sure that we were going to have an open conversation, because that's what I think we absolutely always should have. Prairie, I'm not sure what live stream you're referring to. We're still waiting for this stream to come back, but maybe you can throw another question in there. I can respond to it. Joe, I'm not sure if your microphone's back or not. I did see some private chats about you having to take off. So if you are back, just say hi and maybe get another question out of you.
I certainly am back. And my big question that I saw briefly from the feed that was coming in, and it speaks to the larger question: why are so many of those chairs empty?
Mm-hmm. I said that from the beginning too. I am sad to see them so empty, and I don't know
So
if it's by
sad.
demand. Yeah, if it's demand, not many people want to go there, or are they just filtering out people. I do know of just one gentleman who wants to be there and can't be there based on behavior and allegations about behavior. But other than that, I'm very sad that Ottawa itself is not there and there's not more people.
Mm-hmm.
But are we really surprised that this is not getting the coverage it deserves?
Not in this day and age, not in this country, not at all. Doesn't surprise me one little bit.
Yep. Yeah. And I'm sad by it. Now, what do you think about the idea of going forward that all committees and all inquiries, House, Senate, etc., should be open, streamed, and never behind closed doors again?
100%. They should ban in-camera sessions. And if it's retracted, there has to be, 14 committees that approve the retraction before the retraction is even actually done. Stop hiding stuff. It's time that we started to reveal to Canadians exactly what's going on in this country, and it's in our best interest to do that. And I beg Canadians to tune into parliamentary TV, to listen to this gong show of a government we have, so that you have the actual knowledge you need to speak to other Canadians to help them get involved, because the only way we're going to get involved is if we all equally get involved, and that's the most important thing. So it's about talking with each other and keeping the dialogue going 100%. And that's why I fully enjoy this conversation today. Thank you.
No problem. And Joe, you have a podcast. Do you want to tell everybody about it before
I do.
before See It 11 shuts it down?
Sure. Which it may very well.
Yeah.
Tonight is episode 30 of the Economic Long Way with Joseph Barbuto and myself, commencing at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. That's 5 p.m. Pacific. And Wednesday evening is the premiere episode 1 of a 13 episode series that has been titled Our Canada, Our Village. Episode 1 covers the land. Somewhat of a great big huge 40,000 year in the past, right up to the 1600s in a heartbeat. And then we start to discuss what really has happened to this land that we call Canada.
Is that a play on the words that Canada was a mispronunciation or mistranslation of the word village?
It is from the Iroquois village on the St. Lawrence Seaway, that when the initial meeting happened, it was Kanata.
There you go. A little bit of history for everybody. Okay, the inquiry's
Here
back.
we are.
Welcome
Yep.
back.
Thank you, everybody. We'll talk
Thank
soon.
you.
There's a bit of an internet problem. It's not.
And if you like this video, remember to like and subscribe and press that notification button to receive more information like this. You can also follow me at yellowhead.vote to stay informed and get the inside scoop. Thank you.